Welcome to Sexpertease. I'm your host and favorite sexpert, the Erica Rivera. Tonight, we're talking about something that almost everyone struggles with at some point in relationships, and that's difficult conversations. Whether it's expressing disappointment, asking for clarity, seeking or setting boundaries, or addressing emotional hurt, these conversations can feel incredibly uncomfortable for many people. A lot of people believe communication should feel natural all the time, but healthy communication actually requires emotional skill, regulation, honesty, as well as vulnerability. Many relationships don't fail because people never cared about each other. They fail because important conversations kept getting avoided until resentment, confusion, or emotional distance quietly took over. Tonight's episode also serves as the beginning of a larger relationship communication series throughout the month of June here on Sexpertise. Over the next several episodes, we'll continue exploring emotional availability, validation versus connection, attraction versus compatibility, and emotional maturity in relationships. Because many relationship struggles are deeply interconnected and communication sits at the center of almost all of them. And you all know how much I love the topic of communication. Most people are not avoiding conversations because they simply don't care. Often, they are avoiding emotional discomfort. Difficult conversations can trigger fears of rejection, abandonment, criticism, escalation, or emotional overwhelm. Even emotionally intelligent people can struggle with communication when vulnerability feels emotionally risky. For some people, conflict feels unsafe because of childhood experiences or past relationships. Others learned that keeping the peace was more important than expressing themselves honestly. So, over time, silence can become a survival strategy rather than a conscious relationship choice. The person may not even realize they are avoiding communication because it has become emotionally automatic. A lot of people also confuse avoidance with being easygoing or low maintenance. They tell themselves they're just trying to avoid drama, but emotional suppression often creates larger problems long term. Resentment quietly builds underneath the surface until eventually something small triggers a much larger emotional reaction. Unspoken emotions rarely disappear. They usually just get redirected. Now, there's a major difference between peace and avoidance. A relationship can appear calm on the surface, while important emotional issues are quietly building underneath. Sometimes couples go weeks, months, or even years avoiding topics that actually matter because they fear emotional tension. Many people mistake emotional suppression for maturity. They think that avoiding conflict automatically means they're being patient or emotionally evolved or understanding. But I mean, that's really not the case. Unresolved emotions do not magically resolve themselves simply because nobody's discussing them. Silence often will delay discomfort while increasing emotional distance over time. Real peace comes from emotional honesty, mutual understanding, and resolution. Healthy relationships are not conflict free. They are relationships where both people feel emotionally safe enough to communicate honestly, even when conversations become uncomfortable. Avoidance may feel easier in the short term, but in the long term, it creates um, a healthier emotional stability. Now, communication styles play a huge role in how people approach conflict. Passive communication often involves avoiding needs entirely, staying completely silent, or constantly minimizing feelings to avoid upsetting others. Aggressive communication may involve blame, criticism, emotional escalation, or trying to dominate the conversation instead of resolving it. Now, assertive communication sits in the middle. It allows people to express needs honestly while still respecting the other person emotionally. Unfortunately, many adults were never actually taught assertive communication skills growing up. They simply repeat whatever emotional patterns that they witnessed around them. Some people grew up in homes where conflict meant yelling, punishment, emotional withdrawal, or criticism. Others grew up in environments where emotions were never discussed at all. So that means many adults enter relationships without fully understanding how to communicate directly, calmly, and vulnerably. Communication is a skill, and skills can absolutely be developed later in life. Honesty can feel incredibly vulnerable because it exposes emotional risk. Telling someone you feel hurt, that you feel disconnected, disappointed, or insecure, or even emotionally neglected, that all requires quite a bit of courage. Vulnerability means allowing another person to emotionally affect you, and that can feel very uncomfortable for people who have been hurt before. A lot of people fear that experiencing needs will make them seem needy, perhaps dramatic, difficult, or emotionally overwhelming. Others fear that vulnerability, because they have previously been dismissed, invalidated, or punished for emotional honesty. So they fear that vulnerability for those reasons because they've been through that experience of being invalidated. Now, those past experiences often shape how safe communication feels in present relationships. But healthy intimacy requires emotional visibility, right? So relationships can't fully thrive when people are constantly filtering themselves to avoid discomfort. Emotional closeness grows when people feel emotionally safe enough to be honest instead of emotionally performing to maintain peace. People pleasing, I mean, we hear this term quite often, and that's because we do have a lot of people pleasers out there. But people pleasing is one of the most common reasons difficult conversations unfortunately get avoided. Many individuals prioritize being liked over being honest. They may avoid expressing disappointment, boundaries, frustrations, or emotional needs because they fear upsetting the other person or creating any kind of emotional tension. At first, people pleasing may appear helpful, like it kind of looks helpful because it reduces immediate conflict, but over time, constantly suppressing needs often creates emotional exhaustion, resentment, and emotional imbalance within the relationship. One person quietly carries emotional discomfort while pretending everything is fine externally. Healthy relationships require balance. Caring about another person should not require abandoning yourself emotionally in the process. Emotional maturity involves learning that honesty and kindness can exist together. You can communicate difficult truths respectfully without automatically becoming cruel or selfish. Modern relationships also face communication challenges through digital platforms. Just thinking about this aspect of this topic is exhausting. Many people attempt to handle emotionally serious conversations entirely through text messages, entirely through social media, or indirect online communication. Can any of you resonate with this? While technology makes communication more accessible, it also creates emotional limitations. Texting removes tone, body language, facial expressions, pacing, and emotional nuance. That can increase misunderstanding and emotional disconnection very quickly. People often end up reacting more to how they interpreted the message rather than what the other person actually intended emotionally. A lot of emotionally charged texting also happens because distance feels emotionally safer. It can feel easier to send a difficult paragraph through a screen than to sit face to face inside emotional vulnerability. But emotionally important conversations often deserve emotional presence because presence creates more room for empathy, clarification, and emotional understanding. Now, timing also matters. Timing matters during difficult conversations. Even important truths can be delivered very poorly when emotions are highly escalated. Sometimes people attempt serious discussions while already emotionally overwhelmed, or exhausted, or intoxicated, or distracted, or reactive. That usually makes communication harder instead of healthier. Healthy communication often requires emotional regulation first. Taking a pause to calm down is very different from avoiding the conversation entirely. Emotional regulation means recognizing when your nervous system is too activated to communicate clearly and responsibly in the moment. Quick sip. Lately, my throat's been feeling kind of dry. I'm not sponsoring anything. So, choosing the right environment, the right emotional state, and the right timing can actually significantly improve how difficult conversations unfold. All right, so timing definitely matters. Some conversations need privacy, some need patience, some need both people emotionally grounded first. So, timing does not eliminate the discomfort itself, but it can absolutely reduce unnecessary emotional damage. One of the biggest communication mistakes people make, okay, ready, is listening only to defend themselves. Instead of truly hearing the other person emotionally, they immediately begin preparing counter arguments, explanations, or defenses. That often leaves both people feeling emotionally unheard. Then you're both feeling bad at that point. So, validation does not always mean agreement. Sometimes people simply want to feel emotionally acknowledged and understood. They want to know their emotional experience matters, even if intentions were different from impact. Emotional validation creates emotional safety inside difficult conversations. Relationships actually improve dramatically when both people focus less on winning and more on understanding. Emotional curiosity changes conversations entirely because instead of asking, how do I prove that I'm right? Emotionally healthy communication asks, why is my partner feeling this way? And what are they emotionally trying to communicate? Then we have our boundaries. Boundaries are also important during difficult conversations. Healthy communication does not include manipulation, intimidation, emotional cruelty, humiliation, etc. Emotional honesty should never, ever become an excuse for disrespectful behavior. People are allowed to pause conversations if they become emotionally unsafe or unproductive. Taking space can sometimes help both people regulate emotionally before continuing more constructively. Healthy conflict is not about avoiding discomfort entirely, it's about navigating discomfort responsibly. Boundaries are also there to protect emotional accountability. They help conversations remain emotionally focused rather than becoming destructive. I think that healthy communication is not simply about saying whatever comes to mind emotionally. It's about expressing truth while still maintaining emotional respect for the other person. Healthy communication is built on clarity, consistency, honesty, and of course, mutual respect. It allows both people to feel emotionally safe enough to express themselves honestly without constantly fearing emotional punishment or abandonment. Strong communication does not mean couples never disagree, okay? Let me make that clear. It means that they navigate disagreement without destroying emotional trust. You still want to have that trust no matter what. Emotionally healthy couples still experience conflict, they still experience disappointment, misunderstanding, and all kinds of emotional tension, but the difference is how they respond to those moments together. The goal is not perfection. The goal is emotional honesty paired with accountability. Healthy communication allows relationships to evolve instead of emotionally stagnating. Without communication, assumptions quietly take over, and assumptions are often they're often emotionally inaccurate. Sometimes difficult conversation reveal incompatibilities. And while that can feel painful, clarity is much healthier than confusion. A lot of people stay emotionally stuck because they hope avoidance will somehow preserve the relationship indefinitely. Not every relationship issue can be solved through communication alone. As much as I preach communication, 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 some conflicts expose genuine differences in values, emotional maturity, priorities, relational expectations, or long term goals. Communication creates clarity, but clarity does not always create compatibility. But even painful clarity can ultimately protect people from remaining trapped in emotionally unfulfilling dynamics. Avoiding reality does not change reality. Honest conversations may hurt temporarily, but emotional confusion often causes much deeper long-term emotional exhaustion. Vulnerability and intimacy are deeply connected. Deeply connected. Difficult conversations often strengthen relationships because they increase emotional honesty and emotional transparency. Intimacy grows when people feel emotionally safe. When they feel emotionally safe enough to express difficult truths honestly. When people communicate vulnerably, trust can deepen. Emotional closeness develops through transparency, accountability, and emotional presence, not performance or emotional perfection. Real intimacy requires being emotionally seen beyond the surface, beyond surface levels interactions. Avoiding vulnerability may protect people temporarily, but it also limits emotional closeness long term. So many people want deep emotional intimacy while simultaneously avoiding the emotional exposure that intimacy actually requires. So vulnerability feels risky, but it is often necessary for meaningful connection. So tonight's biggest takeaway is that avoidance may feel easier in the moment, but honest communication creates healthier long-term emotional outcomes. Silence often delays problems instead of resolving them emotionally. So just remember that it's just a temporary fix. It's always going to come back. Difficult conversations are uncomfortable because relationships involve emotional risk. Emotional maturity means being willing to navigate discomfort instead of constantly avoiding it. Healthy communication requires emotional courage, especially when honesty feels vulnerable. Healthy relationships are not built through silence. Sorry to tell you. They are built through honesty, clarity, accountability, emotional regulation, and mutual effort. Mutual effort, it's never one-sided. Communication is not simply about talking more. A lot of people really think it's just talk, talk, talk. It's not. It's about communicating more intentionally, honestly, and responsibly. On that note, thank you for joining me tonight on Sexpertease. I hope tonight's conversation encourages you to approach communication with more honesty, emotional awareness, and compassion. Difficult conversations may feel uncomfortable, but they are often necessary for healthier intimacy and healthier relationships. Throughout the rest of June, we'll continue exploring emotional availability, validation versus connection, attraction versus compatibility, and what emotional maturity actually looks like in a dating or relationship dynamic, because communication patterns influence nearly every part of emotional intimacy. If you enjoy these conversations and want deeper monthly reflections, behind the scenes insights, and ways to support the show, you can join me on Patreon. So on the screen, you should see patreon.com/the Erica Rivera. I would love for you to join me there. You can pledge as little as $5 a month to keep the show on the air. You can also book a one-on-one consultation or reach out about future guest opportunities. My email and social media handles are on the screen. So, as always, stay curious, stay safe, and remember, healthy intimacy starts with honest communication.